To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I am Siddharth Zarabi, and with me today a very special guest, noted economist Dr. Arvind Panagariya, former Vice Chairman of the NITI Aayog, who is now the Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy at Columbia University. Welcome to the show and Business Today, Dr. Panagariya. It is good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Siddharth. Glad to be with you after quite a while.
Same here. Let me begin, Dr. Panagariya, with one of the standard questions that everyone would like your views on. What is the state of the Indian economy? And before you answer this, I just want to sort of bring out one paradox that a lot of us have been noticing, and I'm sure you have also commented upon it, which is that on one hand, we have bumper sales of luxury houses. Luxury cars have had a splendid December. All the German brands are flying off our shelves. Yet on the other hand, we see a significant 15, 20, 25% dip in two-wheeler sales. Registrations of that product have been falling, and it's considered a barometer for a certain economic strata. What is really therefore the status of the Indian economy at this point of time?
Right, you're starting with a googly for me, Siddharth. I would have to look into, what is going on in the credit market, because particularly the middle class and the lower middle class, they often buy these durable products on credit, and if credit is not available or not available at good terms, those sales can dip. And we know this, that when we went into crisis, there was financial markets were in a bit of turmoil, and particularly the NBFCs had been impacted in a major way, and a lot of the consumer credit comes from NBFCs. So that's where I would look. Perhaps there is an answer there, but I don't have the data. I think getting these data in real time is a challenge, and I really don't have those.
Dr. Panagariya, one of the reasons that a lot of economists who are tracking this very closely in India is that they say that prices have gone up, product prices have gone up, plus auto fuels, petrol, for example, has continued to rise. And while the government has done a recent price cut, this is one of the reasons a certain section of the economy is not seeing incomes rise, and cost pressures, even beyond the headline inflation numbers, are biting into their monthly budgets.
It's probable, that's not inconceivable. Inflation rate has been closer to 5 to 6%, as measured by the CPI. I'm personally not perturbed by that. I think, in a growing economy, in a developing country, 5 to 6% inflation is a healthy rate of inflation. It could also be that, we are being incredibly impatient. I'm not against impatience. I think impatience is a good thing, because it then pushes us to seek solutions. But we have gone through a deep crisis. And even when we went into COVID, the economy was not doing so well. The growth rate had dipped even in 1920 to 4%. So some of that residual remains. But, I'm personally kind of more heartened by the fact that investment seems to have shown a recovery. The government expenditure is holding up quite well. Private consumption, on which you are now focusing, it still remains a bit weak. But I would just, in another 6 months or so, we will see the changes happening. So I would focus on what might be ahead of us rather than what is behind us.
Okay, since you make a good point about focusing ahead, I want to therefore pick up 2 or 3 of the points that you made. You first said and spoke about 5 to 6% inflation being healthy in a way. What would that imply in terms of the monetary stance that the Reserve Bank of India should continue to implement during 2022. The reason I ask you is that there is a section of opinion which says it's time to tighten. The RBI must pull back all the accommodation that it has been doing over the last 2 years to counter the COVID pandemic. Where do you stand on that?
I think we need to stay course at this point. I would not begin tightening. We have just talked about, the access to credit, and if at this point the central bank begins tightening, it certainly is going to raise interest rates and then impact negatively access to credit. So I think that there is something which we ought to be concerned about. Particularly as far as people are concerned at large, the food prices have not done too badly. And that's the inflation that is of concern. If the food prices had been skyrocketing, I would be worried, and some action would be in order, even though it's not the RBI action which really impacts food prices as much. But that's what would concern me. But I think right now we are not in a terribly bad shape. We do need to be mindful that the NPAs, etc., get addressed. I think that's something that the RBI needs to worry about. But at this point, I'm quite okay with where we are currently.
Dr. Panagariya, were you surprised by the trajectory of inflation, not just in India, but more particularly in the United States, for example, as economies got out of the pandemic? Is it unusual? Have you yourself felt that this was something that could have been managed better? And for the Indian viewer, if you could help us decipher the current US inflation and what it could also mean for inflows going forward.
Right. So there has been a bit of an element of, the Fed Reserve, which is the central bank in the United States, and the Treasury, which is the finance ministry in the United States, fighting yesterday's war. They were, I think, very much impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. And therefore, they really, I think, in my judgment, overreacted. The transfers that got made during COVID from the very early on were extremely large, and then the Fed Reserve was extremely loose in its monetary policy, and so tons and tons of money got put into the hands of the people, and initially, of course, that couldn't produce big results initially because the shock was not just on the demand side. I mean, if there is a shock to demand, you can, through these transfers and looser monetary policy can solve the problem. But shock was also on the supply side. If people can't get to work, if goods are not coming in, the supplies are not there, and demand alone is not going to solve that problem. And that is where I think, so eventually, first, of course, those transfers translated into very large savings. Almost $2 trillion extra savings in 2020 itself, actually, and then more in 2021. And so now, as the economy opened up and supplies began to come in, demand really kind of then got piled on. And so that's what translated in 2021 in this very unprecedented inflation of 7%, which is highest in the last 40 years, 4 decades. So maybe the 7% is something not something I would not have anticipated, but certainly that the higher inflation was on the way was quite predictable, and this is why in the Indian case, in parallel, I was very appreciative of the fact that our finance ministry did not go overboard in spite of almost near uniform pressure actually from all quarters for India to also follow the US policy. And I think the finance ministry stuck to its guns. I think I was probably one of the lone people who was at that time saying that, look, right now problem is on the supply side if people can't go to work. I mean, in fact, look, if people can't even go to buy their products to the shops and so forth, and shops are not opening up, how will even the transfer will translate even in effective demand? It won't even translate into demand.
Right.
And then the demand and then the demand has to translate into supply. So there were too many obstacles, and so I think we did the right thing by focusing on providing food and shelter to everybody.
Dr. Panagariya, I'm interrupting you here because while you say that a lot has been done on social spending for the poor and there can be no argument against it, including the vaccination program, there is significant criticism that excise duties on fuel have been used as a revenue instrument far beyond perhaps that was necessary. One cut has been done in the context of domestic inflation. Do you think it's time for another fuel excise cut to provide some relief to the middle class?
Look, these are band-aid kind of solutions. You can do that, but what you have to worry also about, and at least I have to worry about, is what do we do to the fiscal deficit that then follows? At the end of the day, somebody will pay for that deficit. The future generations will pay for it if you borrow, or somewhere else you'll have to tax. I mean, I think, this issue to me is a much broader issue, not just the fuel issue. It is the issue of fixing the entire tax system. Because, even today, what our tax revenues, except for the year 2021, which is the latest year for which I have the figures, don't have for 21-22. If I take 2021 out, the revenues have been stuck. Your tax revenues have been stuck at about 17% of the GDP for many years. Now,
Dr. Panagariya, why has the tax system not been fixed? Since you seem to allude to that, are you saying that the tax system has not been fixed and the GST still needs some improvement? Is that what you're alluding to?
Well, certainly GST needs improvement, but I think there is a broader set of it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think GST was a fantastic thing. It was a difficult thing to do, and there were a lot of growing pains with it. But a lot of the problems with respect to portal and verification, etc., have been fixed, not 100%, but quite a bit. But I think there is an issue of the entire structure of GST, not just in terms of the rates, but also the coverage. You see, I mean, in the end, we try to exclude the masses from taxation. And so income tax, you got maybe 4 crore people paying income tax. 50% of the products that are on the CPI, meaning consumer price index list, they are out of the GST, they're the exempted products. Now, when you do these very large exemptions, how are you going to raise revenue? I mean, you can tax all you want the few who are part of the tax net, and you can tax all you want the luxury products on GST side. But at the end of the day, with that very narrow tax base, there's never you can never raise the amount of tax revenue that you need. So you have to. We know that agriculture is never going to be taxed, and agricultural income is never going to be taxed. That leaves out a very large part of the population. How do you bring that population into the tax net? Well, one way is to simply, widen the commodity base of GST. I think, that has to be done. And states have to be brought on board. And, I think, Govind Rao recently, our public finance specialist, he had a good proposal, in a recent op-ed saying that, look, the states are asking for further compensation, extended to another 5 years, but a bargain could be done in terms of increasing the coverage, fixing the structure of the GST. Because in the end, it seems to me that we'll never be able to expand the income tax base in the way it'll have to be if we are to widen that base. So you have to do it through indirect taxation, and that's quite a reasonable way to do it. That's how European Union does that. Large part of the tax revenue is taken through equivalent of GST, value-added tax is what they call it. So that's the way we need to go.
Well, one certainly hopes that policymakers listen to that point because, when I was studying a bit of economics, we used to be taught that direct taxes are progressive and the correct way to tax indirect taxes are regressive, but we now have a situation where perhaps some more thought needs to be given to that. Let me quickly ask you about a couple of other points because we are very close to the budget. One more budget by the Modi government, practically the ninth full budget in its tenure. What do you think should happen as far as fiscal policy is concerned? Should the next financial year also be an expansionary one as far as the budget is concerned? Should Nirmala Sitharaman continue to keep the purse strings a little loose than before?
The debt to GDP ratio where we stand today is much higher. And so it is a bit of a concern, because what we are doing, again, as I said earlier, is to pass the burden, pass the buck to the next generation. Not fair. They shouldn't have to bear that burden. So I would be very cautious. I'm personally on the fiscal side. You saw me on monetary side. I'm a little more liberal. More of a dove rather than a hawk. But on the fiscal side, I tend to be more conservative, more hawkish. I would say that we need to be cautious there. The only circumstances under which I would say, all right, somewhat looser fiscal is if we use that extra room to expand capital expenditures, build up infrastructure yet further. I think that is productive, and so if we are committed to using those proceeds, we do that. The other thing we, of course, need to do is to simply, go faster. Good progress. I think very pleased. Finally, privatizations are happening.
Right.
The DIPAM has got onto the job. Finally, we have a DIPAM secretary who is on the go. So I'm certainly very pleased by that. But maybe we need to kind of push that a little faster. Likewise, asset monetization, etc., and try to kind of, handle the fiscal that way. Because it's double dividend, privatization helps productivity, and at the same time, it helps the revenues. So perhaps try to do it that way. LIC, they're trying to do so. If that succeeds, that'll be a big shot in the arm. So that might be the way to proceed.
Dr. Panagariya, my next question has to do with, the direction of government spending and the focus on welfare that was also necessary during COVID times. Former Chief Economic Advisor Kaushik Basu has, in a recent interview with us, offered a very critical assessment, and he told my colleague Udyan Mukherjee recently that the government's economic mismanagement has meant that not enough is being done for the poor. Given that, how would you respond to the question that I posed to you?
Yeah, look, these are all platitudes. I'm sorry to say. Kaushik is a good friend, and I admire him. But when it comes to the policy, I'm not sure, where it's. Ultimately, Kaushik has to tell us what is he willing to cut, which is politically feasible. Anybody can say that not enough. Yes, all of us actually, who in India would be against doubling, tripling the expenditures or transfers to the poor. None of us would be, that 6,000 could be raised to 18,000. But again, where is the money going to come from? Who is the Kaushik willing to tax? Which expenditure is he willing to reduce? Which is politically feasible? Remember that he was also against farm laws. So is he willing to part with MSP? Can the government part with MSP? Can the government part with
Dr. Panagariya,
subsidy?
Yeah, please continue with the point. Let me just allow me to interject. He's also said that the economic policy being followed by the Modi government has worked well for the top end of society, but it has misfired for the bottom strata of society.
Is the voter telling you that? The voter continues to vote for Mr. Modi. And in fact, it's backed by the social programs. If you look at what has been done on the social expenditures, it's way ahead of previous governments actually, in terms of, well, first of all, money that is meant for the poor goes to the poor. It's not leaking. I mean, we know from the previous governments, the famous line from Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, that only 20 paise goes out of 1 rupee spent. Those have been, but more than that, look, urban subsidy on LPG was ended and it was transferred to the rural poor. Just imagine the life of Swachh Bharat. That is going to impact the health of the people. Then Nal Se Jal, and expanding at such a rapid pace, bringing water to everybody, every household. These are things made for the poor, all the Jan Dhan accounts, the transfers that started 6,000 rupees for farm families. These are all for the poor.
No, you make valid points, and before I move on to another topic, just one more point that Kaushik Basu made, and he says that from 2016 onwards, India's growth every year has been lower than the previous year, and he says that this is a pretty grim situation for workers, farmers, even for the middle class, and India's population, which is growing at 1.2% annually, means that real GDP per capita has shrunk, in his words, to a negative 0.1% over the past 2 years, sir.
All right. So you want to start a debate? Well, okay, I'll give you the answer. So last 2 years, what kind of economy did the UPA hand over to Prime Minister Modi? The last 2 years of UPA, below 6% growth. What was the growth rate in the first 5 years of Prime Minister Modi? 7.4%. Actually, check, yeah, 7.4%. Yes, I think sixth year, it fell to about 6.1, 6.2, something like that. And 1920 was a really bad year, 4%. So no issues with that. But at the same time, what did the previous government do in terms of lending? Recklessly, completely no oversight and no assessment of the loans, and then continuously restructuring those loans, not recognizing them as NPAs. So, a lot of sins got made, and just because in the first term UPA got to free ride all the reforms that were done by Prime Minister Rao and Prime Minister Vajpayee, you can say that, oh, we produced the growth, but what did they do? I mean, I remember asking, in an interview in Monte Ahluwalia in 2013, I think this was on your India Today conclave. It was 13 or 14, I think, that is there. And I said, name 3 major reforms that UPA did in its first term, which you think led to the growth that we observed during those years. And I never got the answer that at the time. So look, I think this is a bad, unproductive debate, which I try to avoid.
Sure, sure. No, I just wanted your view on these points. But as we wind down the conversation, let's come back to what needs to be done. You would definitely concede that due to some of the uncertainty that Omicron has once again injected into the economy, and we are seeing localized shutdowns, but the government seems to be very keen, state governments as well as the centers seem to be very keen on ensuring that the economy does not get disrupted. What would you, in conclusion, in this conversation say should be the priorities for the next financial year that the finance minister, that the government, and indeed Prime Minister Narendra Modi should be focusing on?
So very quickly on the list, at least 2 big things I have mentioned, I've written about. One is on trade. I think, if you're looking for mistakes, that's where I think the mistake has been made, which is a return to protectionism. We need to move away from that. both through lowering our own tariffs, tariffs that are 40% and some of which go over 100%, simply don't help anybody, not even the industry. So we need to roll back, and we need to also do free trade agreements. I think that ought to be on the finance minister's budget agenda. Higher education, that reform has not even begun. And that has to really come on the agenda back. It was there in the budget that was presented by the finance minister immediately after the elections. So that is two things. Now, there are other areas which need fixing, but they are political hot potatoes. The Right to Education Act clearly needs to be addressed. The Land Acquisition Act needs to be addressed. But these are very difficult reforms. And we already talked about, tax reform needs to be done. Even on direct taxation, at least we need more horizontal equity. Equal income should be taxed equally, but we, through these exemptions and all kinds of discriminatory rules, if income is spent in this way, then it is not taxed. If it is spent this way, then it is taxed. If it is earned this way, it is not taxed. If it is earned that way,
Right.
then it is taxed. So this, at least horizontally, equal income should be taxed equally. So that also needs to be done. So these are the 5 areas, at least which require attention. Some are politically very difficult ones, but some are clearly doable. On trade side, on higher education, these are doable reforms. Likewise, tax reforms mostly doable.
Dr. Panagariya, one quick comment. You're in the US, and the poster boy of the electric mobility industry, Elon Musk, tweeted that he was not being allowed to import Tesla cars and sell them in India, and that the government was not agreeing to a request for 0% duty. And when I spoke with government officers, they rejected this view. They said, we are not going to let that happen. We will not allow pressure through tweets guide policy. And he is welcome to come and take benefits from the production-linked incentive scheme for various sectors, including automobiles. Is this an instance of protectionism? Because I tweeted about it, and there's a big debate going on that by offering some concessions to Tesla, you could have at least gotten this thing started off in India and build capacity and knowledge. Where do you stand on this subject?
Look, auto is the classic case of punishing tariffs to the consumer. Who imposes duties of 125% on imports? This auto sector, I do not understand. Why is it such a favored child? 75 years of complete protection, almost every country.
But how would we have built domestic capacities? How would the factories around Chennai, how would all that is happening in Gurugram have happened? Maruti, Suzuki, Pune, the auto hub, how would that have happened unless we gave some amount of protection to domestic industry, sir?
What about pharmaceuticals? You didn't protect them. They built up. What about the petroleum refining? They weren't protected. They built up. And they are competing in the global marketplace. You provide this kind of complete protection, prohibitive tariffs. Anybody can produce domestically. Why are you punishing the consumer?
But
why are you punishing the consumer? I think it's a punishment to the consumer, to which I object. I mean, what sin has the consumer of automobiles, the consumer of two-wheelers committed that they should be subject to such high tariffs?
So you would say that Elon Musk should get what he is seeking?
Well, I said not Elon Musk. I am saying that, look, across the board, you need to bring these ultra high tariff rates down. Everybody, there has to be some sort of justice in terms of protecting the interests of the consumer and the interests of the producers. You cannot just say that, and these are producers of specific commodities. It's not as though, if you want to give some protection to everybody, then do through the exchange rate. Let the rupee depreciate from 75 to 80 rupees or 85 rupees. That gives you uniform protection. But these tariffs are choosing favored children who are inefficient. We have done this in mobile. You tell me one domestic producer who is competing in a big way in the global marketplace in mobiles. So there have been 7 years of protection or 6 years of protection there. Do we have one major kind of mobile manufacturer, domestic one? Now, of course, if Foxconn comes in, they always operate in the global marketplace and they will operate in the marketplace. Samsung comes in, they will operate in the global marketplace. But you name single domestic manufacturer who is actually competing in the global marketplace. So ultimately, if you say that it's infant industry, it has to grow. But auto industry is 75 years of infancy.
Well, Dr. Panagariya, those are points that perhaps deserve a much longer debate, but I'm afraid I'm completely out of time on this show. As always, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll come back and talk to you once again after the budget for next year is presented. Once again, thank you very much for your time, and you, the viewer, if you've been, thank you very much for watching.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.